Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Power of Meaning, where we discuss all things meaningful. Today's episode is about possibly one of the most meaningful things that we could ever talk about, and that is death.
Meaning is a powerful force in our lives. What something means to us will determine whether we feel good or bad. It comes from the old High German word meinen, which means to have in mind. How we interpret data and information is dependent entirely on meaning. I've spent decades on what might be a fool's errand to try and find the meaning of life, studying thousands of texts from some of the greatest minds that ever lived, philosophers, physicists, psychologists, martial artists, writers, poets, the list goes on. What they all have in common is meaning, defining what things mean and which things are meaningful to know and to understand. My search has led me to develop skills I'd once thought impossible. Join me as I share my research on the power of meaning.
Dealing with death and death anxiety and existential dread, it's not a wonder that we're afraid of death and we have these feelings about it. Everything in us is geared to survive. We've also all felt or will feel the pain and suffering and the impact that's very psychologically destabilizing of our loved ones passing away, especially when it happens out of the blue. I mean, it's not it's not really more of a comfort when we see it coming, but especially when it happens as a surprise or a shock, it's very destabilizing. So really, in order to conquer our fear of death, we need to be able to integrate death. See, all psychological problems, I believe, are all problems of integration. And the reason why integration is important is because everything in the universe, I think there's a plane going overhead. Wonder where that's going. Everything in the universe has an opposite. Okay, so this idea comes from Taoist thought, but it's also found in Platonic philosophy and the early Greek philosophers. It's also found in Hinduism. What is he doing, laps? Come on, buddy. Okay, so the idea that everything and its opposite are actually linked. And the universe is made through fragmentation or strife. Okay, this is an idea by some of the Greek philosophers as well, that strife causes the birth of the universe. I'm not going to get too metaphysical at this point because we don't need to, but really you can see this idea of yin and yang, or opposites generating each other at work every day. We know from Newton's laws of physics that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So why would we think that every human action and interaction is divorced from that? We know that our lives and our being is very much part of this physical reality that obeys those same laws. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We also know that, for example, if we run at top speed, we would be what the Chinese would call yang. Right? You reach the pinnacle of your speed, you're motoring along, and then you begin to get yin, you begin to get tired, you begin to slow down. If you become extremely yin, you might get tired and you might fall asleep, right? So then you enter dreams, REM sleep, and then you go into deep sleep, and then when you're in deep sleep, you're absolutely yin as can be, and then you begin to wake up and you start to become yang again. So the opposites, they're actually connected and they're joined together. They're inseparable. They define each other. So when we integrate the opposites, we have to look at the positives. If we will not integrate something that we think is all bad, we only pursue the things that we think are all good, right? But that's actually a fantasy that generates a nightmare. Our psyches are homeostatic, right? So if we pull too far to one side, our psyche it naturally has a mechanism to find homeostasis. This is why in things like bipolar, A person will have a manic phase where they go all the way up and then they'll crash all the way down. It's the psyche's way of balancing back out that upswing. So the more balanced our perceptions are and the more balanced our emotions are, the more psychological wholeness that we have, the healthier we feel and the better we function. We have better judgment, we have better critical thinking, we have better control over our emotions, and we have a more, I guess, smoother run through life. So what we need to do is, first of all, we have to look at life and death. They're opposites. They're the same. They're opposite sides of the same coin. And in order to embrace life, we have to embrace death. And we can't embrace death while we see it as all bad. Okay? So what we have to do is we have to look at first of all, we have to face death as it is. We have to see the negatives, because running away from it, we actually generate a fantasy of what we'd rather have instead. And the Buddha said that trying to avoid what's unavoidable and trying to attain what's unobtainable is the root cause of suffering. So there's this great story about this guy who had a farm in Colorado, and basically he had cows and buffaloes on this farm, right? And the cows and the buffaloes would see storms coming over the western mountains. And when they saw the storm, the cows would actually run away from the storm, okay? So they'd be fearful, they'd run away. But what would happen is the storm would catch up to the cows running, and it would actually they'd just end up running along with the storm. And so they'd end up more wet and more cold as a result. The buffaloes, on the other hand, would see the storm and they would run at the storm. Okay, so perhaps they were afraid and they were looking at it like something they should charge down, like buffaloes do. So the buffaloes would run at the storm, and yeah, they would feel that discomfort and that cold and the wetness and all that sort of stuff. But it would soon pass because they'd faced it down, and the storm would continue on in the opposite direction. And that's a really interesting story, isn't it? It's really worth thinking about. What we need to do is we need to honor, acknowledge the things that we don't like about death. It's soul destroying, it's crushing, it's painful, it's horrible. It creates a sense of emptiness that's unfillable in us. It's like the love that we had for the person that we've lost. It's like a broken circuit. It's like, that love that would have gone out and been reciprocated. It's now like just like a broken live wire that's flicking around everywhere and arcing and sparking and electrocuting us with grief and sorrow. And that's a really, really horrible, shitty place to be. It is. There's no denying it. No one can deny that. It's also horrible to think about the loved ones that we're going to leave behind. It makes us feel anxious. It makes us feel worried and dreadful. And yeah, it's just a really horrible, horrible thing to feel and experience. And it's no wonder that we do try and avoid death, because it is so utterly horrible. It's the culmination of all that's bad to us. And so it's no wonder that we create a fantasy about it, is it? So the fantasy is that we would live forever. If we lived forever, we'd never have that fear. We'd feel safe. We'd feel comfort. We'd feel like we never have to worry about losing our loved ones. We'd never have to worry about them losing us. We'd know everyone's taken care of and everything would feel safe. When we focus on death, it actually feels like we live in a hostile, uncaring environment or universe that's actually not just not fair, but actually unfair and hideously cruel. Whereas if we lived forever, we would feel like we live in heaven. So that's the fantasy that we've set up in our minds, and we kind of don't even realize it. We just assume that we've coped with death. I'm not too bothered about it. But we live as if we're going to live forever because we've created a fantasy to escape from the harsh, brutal reality of death. And so when a lot of times people say that they don't care about death, it's because what they're saying is, I've already insulated myself with this fantasy. I'm all right now. I'm coping with it. But that's not the same thing as what I'm talking about here. We're gonna explore it. We're gonna integrate it. Because quite often those people who think that they're ignoring death or they're not afraid of it, they're not bothered about it, when it happens, they get hit really, really hard. And I don't want that to happen to you guys. And I don't want that to happen to myself either. Okay, so death, if you've ever had a loved one that's, on death's door, or they're really sick and they've experienced a lot of pain and suffering, death can become a welcome relief. That person no longer has to experience the vulnerability, the fear, the embarrassment, the degradation. Like, what if someone's like really old and they're hanging in there? That's not a life. What would you say to death for causing the end of that suffering? You'd say thank you, right? Not all death is like that, though, is it? Some deaths just seem so cruel and random and brutal and unnecessary and before their time. So what else is positive about death? If we look at death, if we use that and we acknowledge that it's there, it can be a great friend to us, because it can teach us that we're not here forever. We're actually like this rare event. All of us today, living today, we're like a rare event that will happen once in a, God knows. We know the universe is 13 billion years old, or thereabouts, roughly now, from our current estimate. It may go on for another 40 billion years or 50 billion years. So we're once in like a, tens of billions of years occurrence. And in the grand scheme of things, we're around for like the blink of an eye, the cosmic twinkling of an eye. And that's really worth thinking about. By acknowledging that fact, instead of running away from it and we run into it, we go, oh shit, this life is really, really precious. I have to get what I need to get done here and now. And I need to stop procrastinating. I need to find what inspires me. I need to follow what... And if you look at life like that, you stop creating the fantasy and putting everything off and living as if you live forever. And you make the most of your existence. So what would you say to death for giving you that? Me personally, I would say thank you. Thank you for making me see that there is no later. It has to be done now. If we look at death and see him for who he is or what he is, we can see that he's reminding us to say all the things that we usually don't say, and do all the things that we don't do for our loved ones. But we put it off because we're so insulated against the fear of death. If we look at the anxiety generated by death, everything in its opposite are linked, right? So to be anxious proves, in a weird way, kind of proves that you're brave. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's functioning in the face of fear. So if you've gone on with your life and you're struggling and you're finding it hard every day and you're feeling anxious all the time and you're feeling drained and you're finding it hard to get through and you're slogging, everything's like a major difficulty, that just shows how incredibly brave you actually are. It takes heroic strength to do that. But while you run away from those feelings of anxiety and stress, you can't embrace your courage. When you don't want your anxiety, you don't want your courage. They're two sides of the same coin. And it's the same with death and life. If you don't accept death, you cannot fully accept life. You can't live fully. Right? And that's what most people do. They create a fantasy that they're going to live forever. They put it out of their mind so that they can cope with the existential dread, and then their life just passes them by. Now, if you were immortal, there's this great quote in, what was it? It was Troy with Brad Pitt. And, he's talking about the gods. And he says that the gods, they envy us because we're mortal. And what does he say? He says, because every moment might be our last. we are, everything is more beautiful because we're doomed. That's what he says. Everything is more beautiful because we are doomed. Isn't that true? But when we block that out, we can't see the beauty. We have to look at it as it is. And as you look at it like that, notice how it feels. It's not so bad. It's not so bad, is it? You know, our tiny lives carry immense value because of their rarity, you know. When we think that our loved ones will be around forever, and this is what happens when we act like this in our lives, we tend to put it all off. We tend to not say the things that we should say. That's a terrible loss. Consider how much of a loss that is. What would you say to death for offering you the opportunity to not make that mistake? So that you look at death, and instead of like running away from him, creating a fantasy, you embrace what he has to offer you and what he has to tell you and what he has to teach you. And then you realize, oh shit, I need to say those things now. I need to do those things now. And if you didn't, you could go for all eternity, not lifting a finger, not doing anything, putting everything off. And who would want to live forever like that? I mean, we often tell ourselves, oh, if I lived forever, I'd be able to do this and that. I'd study 10 different things. Most people don't study hardly anything, and they get like the blink of an eye. What makes you think that you're going to use eternity any more than you use time? If you're not capable of using time, you're not fit for eternity. Right? So we need to integrate death. And I hope some of what I've said here has really resonated with you. And to cap it off, I'm going to leave you with this incredibly beautiful poem by Khalil Gibran. And it's from the book The Prophet, and he's talking about death. Hope you enjoy it.
We would ask now of death, and he said, you would know the secret of death, but how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? The owl whose night-bound eyes are blind unto the day cannot unveil the mystery of light. If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life, for life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. In the depth of your hopes and desires lies your silent knowledge of the beyond, and like seeds dreaming beneath the snow, your heart dreams of spring. Trust the dreams, for in them is hidden the gate to eternity. Your fear of death is but the trembling of the shepherd when he stands before the king whose hand is to be laid upon him in honor. Is the shepherd not joyful beneath his trembling, that he shall wear the mark of the king? Yet is he not more mindful of his trembling? For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountain top, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance.
Hey guys, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for watching the video. I hope it resonated with you. I hope it helps shift the way you think and feel on some level, so that you can face life with a bit more courage and a bit more joy. And if it did resonate with you, please feel free to like and subscribe to the channel, because it does help get the content out there to other people that might be in a dark place and need that information. Having said that, if you or anyone you know is struggling with anxiety, please feel free to contact me. You can do that now. My information is in the description underneath. You can contact me through the website. I work with people all over the world via Zoom and Skype. In the meantime, please live a life with meaning. And I'll see you in the next video.